Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Frontline Fridays, brought to you by YOOBIC. On this podcast, we sit down with leaders who are inspiring excellence in their frontline teams and learn what they do differently. I'm Ron Thurston. I'm the co-founder of Aussie, where we're reimagining retail recruiting from both the candidate experience and the retailer business model. You can go to useaussie.com. That's useossy.com to learn more. And we're currently offering early access for a candidate digital profile for everyone that works in retail. And today we're talking leadership, but more specifically, leadership with vulnerability. So my guest today is Payton McFaden, who has a lot of experience embracing vulnerability in her leadership role at Peloton. So I wanted to share just a couple of bullets, and then we're going to jump right in. So Payton is Peloton's Director of Global Sales Operations, a role marked by her 8-year ascent from the field to corporate positions, and she's based in Houston, Texas. And we're, of course, going to dig into that kind of starting in the field and moving into this global director of sales operations role. She manages global, as I said, sales operations, including daily functions, infrastructure, program design, and enhancing team efficiency by reducing sales friction. Her leadership has significantly supported Peloton's frontline sales teams. And with a background in retail sales management across various companies, Payton's passion for operational strategy and culture development was honored in 2019 with Peloton's Think and Act Like an Owner Award. Her educational foundation is in retail management, which is nice, as so many people, as I write about, is accidental, from the Art Institute International and a fine arts diploma from Glassell School of Art. Complements her unique business perspective shaped by her family's diverse business endeavors, which we're also going to speak about. So Payton, welcome to Frontline Fridays.
Thanks, Ron. I'm super excited to chat with you again. It's a privilege to be here. I know there's not many opportunities to get this audience, so thank you.
It's my pleasure. And we didn't coordinate, but we look great in our wood backgrounds and our black t-shirts, and we're ready to have this conversation. I feel very like Peloton inspired today. I wanted to kind of to set the stage first. Like, let's talk a little bit about your week to week, day to day responsibility, because it's a unique role within Peloton. So tell us more.
Sure. Yeah. So you recapped what I do well. So as the director of global sales operations, my biggest focus is on our frontline workers and our sales strategy. So my team, we support both 1P and 3P sales. We didn't start there, though. We actually just started in retail when operations first became a thing, and we've slowly enhanced that. We expanded into our inside sales team, third party, and we're looking to continue to expand that elsewhere. And my typical week consists of either traveling to New York to meet with my team, because most of them are in New York. So I get the opportunity to go to our headquarters often. And then when I'm not in New York, I'm working from home, where my weekly meetings influence the direction really in just which we work. I put a lot of trust in my team and how they operate with their expertise. And it really allows me to focus on larger strategy plans. And because leadership is such a big part of my role, my day-to-day is around coaching my team through cross-functional alignment and really just leading discussions around growth and change for retail inside sales of our 1P, 3P organization.
And so you have a lot of different people that you're engaged with. And, it sounds like, 1P, 3P, all the store operations, it's really every department.
It really is.
How do you manage that?
Yeah, we're a very cross-functional team. We're anywhere from our global security team to our legal team, our third-party sales, you name it, we play a factor in it. And it's delegated through my team. So each individual on my team has their different responsibilities and who they're partnering with the most. And their goal is just to continue to build the relationship and expand their work, and how sales operations plays a part in, say, the legality of Peloton, or vice versa. So if our frontline employees are needing the support, we make sure that we're identifying where those gaps are, and then we're creating that change management for them.
Super interesting. And I think, as I mentioned, you spending the first 7, 8 years, right, of your career, in the field in many different roles, you have such a unique and valuable perspective of what the field needs today. So tell us how you use that to influence the decisions that you make now.
Sure. So not only did I spend the first 5 years in a retail setting, but I spent it at a time when Peloton was still very much at that Kickstarter phase. It's actually what attracted me to go for this role. As you mentioned, I have an experience and a background in retail. I studied it. I've worked for different retail companies, but I had never worked for a company that was at the phase they were when I started, at that Kickstarter phase. And I had a lot of passion within that. I saw the gaps within the business. When I started, I think I was like the 14th store to open. We didn't really have anyone in headquarters that was running retail quite yet. And I had that opportunity to really own my brick and mortar location as if it were my own. And that's what really kickstarted a lot of my operational journey for me. And I have learned what operations is through Peloton. I think it's kind of one of those unspoken things in other retail companies. You're used to just connecting with your sales leader, right? Your regional manager, your area manager, district manager, whatever it may be. And it's so sales focused, so sales heavy. But I've just enjoyed having the opportunity to build operations from the scratch with this company.
And operations from scratch done through the lens of running a store.
Correct.
Again, I think sometimes we take for granted that new content or new policy, some of that are written by people who really understand it, and you really do. Yeah, and so you're like, well, I could call this store, I could do a quick Zoom call and talk about this. Like your connection to the field's really strong, and that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, retail in general, I've always called it the underdog. The underdogs, that's who we are. It's a skill set that every retailer experiences. It's actually something you talk about in your book, Retail Pride, of as a store manager, you're not just a sales leader, right? You're a people leader, and you've got marketing experience, you've got visual merchandising experience, operational, HR, you name it, you're involved in it, and you're practicing it, and you're getting that firsthand experience. And for me, that was something that I had that opportunity to experience, and something that, I didn't know, again, what operations was. I hadn't really had it clearly defined to me. But I knew that there were gaps in my business, and I knew that I had the skill set in order to fill in those gaps. And you see that still across Peloton to this day. We've got a strong group of leaders that, just like in any retail setting, carry a large amount of skills that go just beyond retail.
Imagine that's very true, because it's also a really unique business model. Like there's so many different complexities and things that you have to manage that are different than traditional, like D2C selling product in a store and so on.
Yeah.
And what I love the story that you shared with me when we first met around kind of the 7 attempts to apply for a corporate role from the field. And so I love it because it shows tenacity. It shows, this sometimes judgment of field roles versus corporate. And 7 times you went back and said, no, I want to work at corporate. I want to work at corporate. And for all of my decades in stores, it's a conversation that I have a lot. Like, is the corporate role what you dream of, or does it just sound better today? So you kept going back, and I want you to share that story a little bit.
You're right. It took about 7 attempts to get to the HQ role. And I believe that so many people can relate to my career story. I've seen it firsthand. I've worked with people who continue to still strive for an HQ role, or just movement outside of retail. And I find the transparency in my journey to be only helpful. It should be no secret that at times, I didn't know what I was doing, or I didn't know how to get there. I had to ask for help. I had to be vulnerable. I had to lean on others. And it is no secret that I also had to work my butt off. I failed a lot, and I was determined to always be a step ahead. And I think that there are like I mentioned, countless retail sales professionals out there that are doing the same thing. And I think that path to successful leadership or transition into another role is messy. And I think that that's okay, right? Sometimes it's a combination of luck involved. Sometimes it's a combination of just having the right leadership in place. But then I also think it's about being open and being vulnerable about where you want to go and where you're headed. And I truly think that vulnerability is a strength. I don't think it's a weakness. I think that if you can have that approach to your own professional growth, it really will allow for you to have more self-awareness, more confidence, and really just allow you to build more relationships in order to help you get where you want to go. And it's funny because I kind of hinted to it earlier, but Peloton actually saw my operational skill set before I did. And it was never a path I wanted to go down. Operations to me was, I don't know, I just thought of it as like plugging away at numbers, being the middleman. It sounded boring and dry and
Like
blah.
writing policy,
Yeah,
stuff like that. Yeah.
like that doesn't sound fun when you're coming from a retail environment. And I had the right leadership in place, which I was fortunate to have. I at the time, my regional manager was like, "What do you think about operations?" And I'm like, "What is operations?" Like you tell me, I have no idea. But as I started to learn more about it, I realized that it didn't matter. I had this big skill set, and I wanted to do like learning and development, or I wanted to do visual merchandising. And I started to learn that it wasn't so much about like which department I wanted to head into. It was about where the need was in the business and where my skill set fit in with that. And I've now learned, now that I sit in operations, that, I don't want to be anywhere else. I'm enjoying it because I'm filling in those gaps, right? And I still get to do the creative things and the fun things that come with maybe where my passions lied before. But yeah, it wasn't an easy journey. It wasn't just like, oh, regional manager said, let's do operations. And then there I was to the point of the
Right.
7 months.
Right. And when you accepted the role and you got into it, what surprised you most about moving from the field to a headquarters role?
That's a great question. So as a store manager, you're on a team, right? And you're managing that team and you're with them all day long. But one thing as a store manager is you have that final say so. You have that ability to, make the final decision and influence a little bit more than maybe someone just as a sales rep on the team. And when I transitioned into HQ, I knew I was going to be on a team. I knew that I would still have to have the same skill sets of being a team player. But the first thing I had to learn right off the bat was to slow down and to communicate more. I started making decisions like left and right. I was like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to change this and go this way. And I had partners and peers that I had to discuss that with. And I couldn't just jump into making those decisions. But that was probably one of the biggest things. I had this confidence that I was a good team player because I've been managing teams for years. But then I jump into this role where I'm getting feedback of like, hey, don't forget you're on this team. You need to slow down and work with us too.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because when I moved into my first kind of multi-store roles in the field, I had the exact same feedback. Because as a store manager, you're right. You move, you open the door that day, and anything can happen, and you move fast, and you make decisions quickly, and you own the business. And in a role like yours, you're communicating up, you're communicating across, you're communicating to the field. You have to tell everyone what you're doing every day. And I know that was a new skill for you.
Most definitely. Yeah, I have vivid memories of some of my first conversations with my team around, I had to soak it in. I had to be willing to take that feedback. But it's a skill set that's needed in any environment, but it doesn't mean that skill set just easily shifts from one place to the other.
Right. Yeah, thank you. And when you started to describe that, you mentioned failure and fear and this idea of not really sure because you didn't know exactly what the role was, or say, I dreamed to be in store ops. And I know we kind of titled this conversation, about embracing vulnerability and leadership. So talk to us a little bit more about like how that shows up. How does vulnerability show up for you in your leadership?
Sure. So I can talk just a little bit about like how I got to a place of vulnerability. And as I mentioned before, my passion was more so around like teaching and coaching. I took pride as a store manager in promoting people up and out into being store managers or assistant store managers elsewhere. And having that privilege to lead, I had a lot of passion in my work that involved that teaching, and I quickly learned that as a leader, you know, I don't have an option to not be vulnerable and where I want to succeed and what areas I want to grow in. And throughout the journey of like, applying for different roles 7 times, being told to try to stick with one path and build the connections through there and grow throughout that. I lost a lot of confidence in that process. Like the very first time I applied for a role, confidence was as high as you can think of it. By the time I got to the 7th time applying for it, I felt like I had almost no confidence in what I was doing. And it stemmed back to my childhood, actually. So I had little to no confidence growing up. I grew up around a lot of successful people, actually. So at my school, in my family, in my community. And my lack of confidence came from not being a strong student in grade school. I took countless summer classes to make up for failed grades. I spent mornings, nights, holidays working just to fail another test or class. I actually was a student at NILD, which is the National Institute of Learning Disability. And I even struggled to graduate. My school was like, we just need to get you out of here. They gave me an alternative diploma that had less credits. And it was just a huge, decrease in my confidence growing up. But because of that, I almost didn't really have a choice but to be vulnerable. It was almost this thing that was kind of forced upon me when I was younger. I didn't really realize that that's what that was. But I've also now chosen to mold that same approach in my adulthood and in my career. And it didn't start right off the bat. It started throughout that interview process of continuing to get those no's. It was going back to my childhood of being told, no, you're failing, you're not doing well. You got to keep trying. You got to do it again. And I was pushed back into it and into being vulnerable. And, I spent a lot of those, it was about a 5-year time frame applying for these different roles before I got to where I am. And I spent a lot of those years thinking about my lack of IQ and how I felt like that was holding me back. There were meetings where I would be super frustrated, feeling like I was surrounded by people that were smarter than me, that were making better decisions than me. And eventually, just as I naturally became more vulnerable, I snapped into my emotional intelligence. And I learned that there's more success for myself in that approach of using my EQ over my IQ. And I feel like this can probably be relevant to a lot of people, but I've learned that there was so much importance in discovering that strength within myself, that I didn't have to be the smartest person in the room, that, to get to the role over the other guy and to be recognized, it started with vulnerability. It started with breaking it down, understanding what my opportunities were, being honest about them. And through that, I gained a lot of self-awareness. I was able to really start understanding what my skill set was, why I wasn't getting these roles, and understanding that I needed to surround myself with people who have the skill sets that I don't have and learn from them.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing, all of that. And it feels to me like you've become more comfortable sharing that and of kind of how you grow up. Do you do that in your leadership style? Do you make people feel safe? Like how does this kind of appear in your daily work?
Yeah, sometimes it's more obvious topic, like I'm willing to talk about vulnerability itself, and sometimes it's more of like a hidden approach, right? And I think one of the important things about how this takes place in a team environment is just communicating your leadership style and communicating your approach. If you're someone who struggles with vulnerability in the workplace, you can't really just jump right into it, right? And that definitely wasn't my approach. I wasn't like, oh, I'm not vulnerable, and all of a sudden I'm going to be vulnerable. And hey, guys, like here's every single, opportunity about myself. But my team knows me, and I have the confidence, and I'm okay with my team knowing where my gaps are, and we almost have fun with it. I think that there can be a little bit of this playfulness and vulnerability if your team knows who you are. And I'll use a small, silly example, but when I was a store manager, you're on the sales floor all day, right? You're hanging out, you become friends, you're buddies, you pretty much know everything about each other. At least you hope so. And opportunity is a part of that in leadership, right? Like it can't just be your team has opportunities. As a leader, we have them too. And my team, my when I was a store manager, they knew like I had this little bit of like airheadiness about me. Like sometimes I don't get the most common sense things, or it just kind of goes over my head. And my team knew that. And I was vulnerable about that. And instead of it being an embarrassing thing for me as a leader, it was something we could all laugh at. And it was something that they kind of knew and expected out of me, because I was vulnerable in that area. And so when we'd have a moment on the sales floor of, okay, Payton not getting, this common sense task being sent to us, we could laugh it off. So to answer your question, like, yes, I'm okay talking about it in the workplace. Yes, I enjoy the conversation with my team. I enjoy that they know these things about me. And I think that they appreciate it as well. It has built a lot of trust between myself and my teams.
Yeah. And trust is such a powerful word, because of that sharing. It was interesting because just a week ago, last Friday, I had the opportunity to speak at the NRF Foundation Student Program Day. And so you have about 1,200 students from 100 different schools. And the questions that I received, I was on stage in the morning, and I spent the day kind of chatting with them during breaks and during lunch. And a lot of their questions were like, how do I stand out? How do I make a difference? And sometimes standing out isn't actually being better than everybody else. I think standing out is what's unique about you and how willing are you to tell your story. And when you're 21 or 22, where most of these young people were, that's really hard to do. But as you get older, I think what you're sharing is, part of how you stand out is also what makes you unique and different. And that's special to you, and sharing your own story. And it's so powerful in leadership. We're not all perfect every day. We're not all great at everything. We maybe look like we are or pretend that we are, but we aren't. And I admire you for using this as a really foundational part of how you've had such success. It's impressive.
I appreciate that. I truly believe that there's simplicity in leadership. Like it doesn't need to be this over thought out thing. People want to be able to relate to you and be around you. We should not be intimidating as leaders, right? There's got to be the honesty within it. There's got to be this just certain approach, and I think communication is a big part of it, right? Like, no, you don't need to over communicate. You definitely don't want to under communicate, but you just want to be able to relate and have a conversation and be vulnerable and honest and open. And I think if you can nail that down as a leader, the amount of influence you're going to have in your career is going to be strong. People are going to want to follow in those footsteps as well. So yeah, I think it can be simple. It really can.
It can, yet we spend so much time overcomplicating it.
Yes.
I do think that sometimes we build this idea of, and I think about annual review processes, like listing out all of your strengths, but also listing out your opportunities, and are your opportunities actually your strengths? And do you show up as exactly as described in the job description? And okay, maybe you don't. And would that be then considered an opportunity? Where I would look at that and say, well, what's then unique about you, and why? And how can we actually identify that as a strength? And I do think we try to put ourselves into these boxes of, this is what the competencies are, this is the strengths, this is how you should show up, this is how you should show up every day. And I think that pressure puts a lot of additional stress on career choices. I don't know if that's been your experience. It's certainly been mine.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that I don't know, it's like almost this double-edged thought around how companies handle feedback and growth and development, but then how individuals handle it as well. Um, I think that all organizations, retail or not, I believe that they appreciate the skills that their leaders possess. Sometimes it's easier to
Yeah.
talk about the more positive things and the opportunity things, which is why we set up, to your point, these yearly, quarterly reviews. But I still think there's work to be done, especially in one of the largest industries. Like retail is a gold mine of talent, and the reputation, in my opinion, needs to shift. Um, I think that leadership alone is being transformed and vulnerability is being more accepted in the workplace. But I do think that every leader, has to accept some form of responsibility and really not just leading their team, but coaching and developing them as well. Like you're not taking on just the responsibility of being a sales leader or ops leader. You're taking on the responsibility of being a people leader.
Mhm.
But then I also think the other side of it is as an employee, you're not everyone's going to work for a company that has growth opportunities or recognizes skills and strengths. And I think as individuals, we have to be willing to put in that work and be vulnerable and have the self-awareness to know what environment we're in and how we should not be so reliant on the company as well to get us to where we want to go. So it almost has to be the sweet spot of the combination of both, right?
Yeah, yeah. I love that you just said that because it's also from what I said to the students last week is no one is responsible for your career except you.
Mm.
And you have to do the work. And then you get to choose. And then you can choose the leaders you want to work for, the organizations that you admire, leaders you have seen do other great work, brands that are aligned with your personal values. You get to choose. If you wait for everyone else to do that work for you and expect things to be handed, and I'm talking about like learning and development opportunities, they may not show up.
Mhm.
And sounds like you've also then been able to teach others vulnerability, leadership skills, and break it down in pretty simple forms.
Yeah, I mean, I experienced it firsthand to what you just said, right? Like I was so reliant on my company getting me there. And, I had this thought of like 50-50 balance, well, we'll meet in the middle when really it was 100% on me,
Yeah.
in order to get myself there. And I do coach that now. I do teach that. And I have a huge passion in that philosophy of I will be the leader that will support you 100%. Your goals are my goals, but the effort stems from you and I will be the one to provide you the tools and I can provide you on how to sharpen those tools. But it is, on each individual to really understand that and to look in the mirror and reflect and think of, okay, where else can I grow? Where else can I be? And some people don't like this quote, but like, where else can I be comfortable with being uncomfortable? Like,
Yeah.
I had a leader that told me once, she was like, are you feeling challenged? And that question stumped me. I was like, am I feeling challenged? Okay. Like, yes, no, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. And ultimately she broke it down and she was like, I want you to feel challenged. I want you to come into work every day feeling like you have purpose, feeling like you're having to break things down and learn and, go home and you're feeling accomplished. It shouldn't be an easy job. You should feel that challenge. I think that's another part of it too, is how do we challenge ourselves? One other thought on it is the motivation topic. I almost have completely taken motivation out of my vocabulary because I don't think we can create motivation. I think it's something that, is presented to us and it comes and goes at times. But I believe in dedication over motivation. If you can stay dedicated to your sport and your practice and your goals, you'll get there. Don't rely on motivation to get you there.
Yeah. And consistency creates that.
Mm.
The ability to commit and be consistent in it, exactly like you said. The result is right there. We're running out of time, so I want to wrap up. Just as what advice would you give other people that you to encourage them maybe to to share more about what they're scared of, or they don't feel like the smartest person in the room, or they're struggling. What advice would you give to anyone that feels that way?
I think the biggest thing is like, what do you have to lose? If you're at a point where you've tried so much, you're on your seventh attempt of the next steps, and you've probably felt like you've lost it all and you've given up hope, just try the vulnerability, try that self-awareness practice, and really just allowing yourself to open up to others and to communicate a little bit more than maybe you would have in the past. And practice it with someone that you trust, right? Like, again, don't just jump into it full blown. Find a peer, find a friend, a colleague, whatever it is, and start to practice that vulnerability. And you'll be surprised how quickly, small doors will start to open.
Yeah. And someone else may share something to you that they never did before at the same time. The trust creates trust in other people. Incredible. Thank you. Thank you, Payton, for sharing your story and sharing your journey. And I know there's so many people that can relate to your career so far and in the future you're going to have and how you lead. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks, Ron. I appreciate you having me again. It was great. Good conversation.
Great conversation. Thank you. To our listeners, keep learning and inspiring. And I'm certainly very inspired by all of our guests on the show. Frontline Fridays will be back in February with a new lineup of guests for the spring season right here on LinkedIn Live. Be sure to follow YOOBIC on LinkedIn for the show schedule. And if you're on the hunt for communication, micro-learning, task management tools, and to guide your frontline teams into the future, check out what YOOBIC can do. Just click on the link in the comments. And with that, I will say have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll see you really soon on the show. Thanks, Payton.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.